Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maureen Droney with the Recording Academy Producers and Engineers Wing, and we're back for episode 3 of Inside the Mix, which we're co-hosting with Dolby as part of the Atmos Music Masterclasses. This is the third of what's planned to be at least a 6-part series with episodes on everything immersive, from formats and best practices to rendering, mastering, and metadata. We're live today, so put your questions in the Zoom Q&A function, but all of these Inside the Mix episodes will also be posted online and we'll let you know where and when. Today, our special guests from Dolby are David Gould and John Scanlon. David Gould is Senior Director, Content Creation Solutions at Dolby, where he's responsible for creating products and solutions aimed to enable and inspire the creative community to do their best work in Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. Prior to joining Dolby in 2012, David was a senior product manager at Avid, working with Pro Tools software. David is, however, also one of us, a recording engineer who began his career in London at Abbey Road Studios, where he specialized in orchestral film scoring. John Scanlon has a 20-year background in education, designing curriculum, and instruction in music recording and mixing, post-production, and systems integration. John's role at Dolby is to develop learning resources to educate and assist institutions, artists, and other creative individuals in their workflows using Dolby technologies. His responsibilities also include being technical manager, systems designer, and lead integrator globally for Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision experiential installations. Our moderator again today is multiple Grammy-winning engineer Michael Romanowski, owner of the San Francisco Bay Area's Coast Mastering. We are planning to spend about 35 minutes on the presentations, and then we've got another 25 minutes allocated for Q&A. So please make sure to use that opportunity to ask your questions. So now here's Christine Thomas, Dolby's head of music partnerships, to get us started. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Maureen. What an incredible roster we have today. I'm really excited to see the conversation. As always, thank you very much to Maureen and to the Recording Academy for having us. It is an honor, and we appreciate working with all of you in the P&E wing and the Recording Academy at large on a daily basis. With that, it's my pleasure to remind you one more time to please submit your questions in the Q&A window. We will work to get to all of you as possible, and with that, I will bring my colleagues on screen and ask them to go ahead and take this show away, and we'll be back with you shortly.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Maureen. Really appreciate it. Hey, John. Hey, David. Welcome.
Hey there.
Glad to have you guys here. Thank you for participating in round number 3. Let's talk about creation solutions. Thanks for being here.
All right. Well, shall I just get started then? Let me share my presentation.
Yeah, let's just jump right in. That sounds great.
All right. All right, then. Well, yeah, thank you very much for having us here today. Basically wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the various solutions that we have for creating music in Dolby Atmos. I'll spend, as I say, about 20 minutes maybe presenting, and then really excited to get into Q&A where we can dig into details on any of this. So at the top level, the overview of the kind of the mixing solutions for Dolby Atmos, we have this very mature set of solutions at this point that have really grown and evolved since it was first introduced in 2012. We've really been on a mission over the past decade or so, engaged with the creative community to evolve our solutions to these many different use cases where we are now seeing Dolby Atmos being adopted. And specifically thinking of the work we've been doing in the music industry over the past 5 or so years, it really has been this amazing collaboration with the creative community to continue to evolve what was possible and what was developed for Dolby Atmos to really deliver on this promise of what music can be in Dolby Atmos. So we'll talk a little bit today about this kind of scalable set of solutions, all the different ways that it comes together. But at the top level, this diagram on the right sort of summarizes any Dolby Atmos workflow consists of some kind of Dolby Atmos enabled workstation, whether that's got a native panner in it, a native renderer, whether it's just using a plugin based panner. That then connects to a renderer that actually takes all of that audio plus metadata for the audio objects, knows what your room configuration is, and that then feeds your monitoring and then generates your file formats for delivery. And so all of these solutions at some point fit into that sort of overview, but there's just a lot of variables along the way as well. So hopefully we can clarify some of that, and then yeah, people can figure out what is best for their needs. So as I say, it's a scalable set of solutions which go all the way from, we've all seen this amazing picture of Blackbird, but that's not the only place where Dolby Atmos can exist these days. We've got, you know, plenty of home studios that are now enabled with Dolby Atmos, all the way down to someone running on a laptop with a pair of headphones. You can be creating in Atmos, you can be mixing in Atmos throughout this entire spectrum, which is how the world works. You need to be able to work on the go. You need to be able to work in a major studio, and you need this content to be compatible. You need these ways of working to flow between all of these different use cases. And so that's where a lot of our focus has been, enabling that scale, but also that compatibility. So on the Dolby side of things, we've been developing a number of tools, and the one that a lot of people will see, and is sort of the centerpiece of most of what we on the Dolby tool side of things have been working on, is the Dolby Atmos renderer application. And that's the screenshot that we can see here. And this is a software application that, as I say, takes the audio, takes the metadata, takes both the bed audio, which is the channel-based content, and then also takes those audio objects, which are a lot of what gives Atmos its scalability and some of the magic, as it were. Takes all of that information, takes that audio, takes that metadata, has your room loaded, and allows you to do that rendering. It provides metering, it provides visual feedback of what is going on, that 3D room view. It can feed speakers, it can feed headphones, it can do loudness metering. So there's a lot of functionality in there. It can also load master files and play them back. And really, up until recently, this was the way to create Dolby Atmos. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the native integrations that have happened recently, but this has been sort of the centerpiece, and has been something that we've been really evolving over the past few years, and you know, again, trying to make it as streamlined as possible for the needs of the music industry. Now, the renderer application itself is one application that is available in two different packages that you can get from Dolby. And I just want to kind of talk through what those are. You'll probably have heard of them, but again, just to kind of clarify some of the differences. So the first thing is what we call the Dolby Atmos Mastering Suite. And this is really about having a dedicated workstation that is doing that rendering. So you saw the renderer application that can run on a dedicated piece of hardware, dedicated workstation, and receive audio and metadata. So it would receive audio over a traditional audio link, receive metadata over a network, and give you a lot of flexibility around being able to have all of that rendering processing power on that standalone machine. It can do EQ for room calibration. It can support speaker arrays. If you have multiple sources for one reason or another, you can connect multiple sources into that single workstation. And so it really is kind of seen as that very, you know, the much higher end, more flexible, more powerful solution for the studios that need that. And in terms of the digital audio workstations that it can work with, today with this, we support Pro Tools now in both the studio version as well as the Flex version, Blackmagic Resolve, Steinberg Nuendo, Merging Pyramix, or the Dolby Atmos Music Panner that I'll talk about a little later, can all connect into this. The renderer itself can run on a Windows or a Mac machine. We see a Windows box in this diagram here, but it really is designed as this kind of standalone power on demand, ultimate flexibility solution. So as I say, who's it for? It's for studios that require the highest performance and flexibility. It's also for studios that run their primary DAW on a PC. So the next solution we'll talk about, the production suite, is a Mac-only solution, and a lot of that is due to the inter-application audio routing that we have to do. That's really built on some core audio libraries that are really Mac-only, and there's not an easy equivalent on the Windows side, which is why some of that inter-application audio routing just isn't possible. Now, what are some of the limitations? Well, this solution does require that 128 channels of audio I/O between your workstation and your rendering workstation. That in of itself has some challenges depending on what your DAW is, depending on what your interfaces are, depending on how your studio is built. So figuring out that link can be important. Another limitation not listed here is just the complexity of having two systems to manage. There is a renderer remote application that allows you to remote control the application, but it's still a second machine, a second set of applications that can add some complexity. But you do get flexibility in return for that.
Hey, Dave, let me ask you, can I ask you a quick question? When you're talking about going back and forth, actually, that's really great to know, because I wasn't sure the PC only. I didn't, I understood where the work, the Mac versus PC, but realizing that was a great solution for anybody who needed PC was great to go to the mastering suite to begin with. When you're talking about integration from computer to computer, 128 channels back and forth, can you talk, maybe just give a couple examples of some types of devices, or it's just so people know what they can be, how they can connect, or maybe what kind of routing they could use?
Yeah, so the configurations that we've tested are with Maddie and with Dante. So, that immediately brings up some kind of obvious interfaces and devices that can work with that. There is a PCIe Dante card that can do 128 channels. They're becoming increasingly hard to come by, as are so many bits of hardware in the world these days.
Anything with a chip these days, especially the Brooklyn 2 cards. Yeah,
right. So that's an option. Maddie is still a wonderfully reliable cable from point A to point B that just works. So again, a lot of it depends on your DAW. Different DAWs will have different requirements, but there's quite a few options out there. I mean, all the Focusrite stuff is great, all the RME stuff is great, and so that's what we tend to see a lot of. Like the recent the DAD box is a pretty amazing Thunderbolt box that will do a lot of this from a single interface as well. So there are a number of options out there that really provide a lot of flexibility.
Mostly network-based kind of stuff, though, rather than like an AES interface, going AES out, AES in, or something like that.
Exactly. We're seeing, I mean, as everyone is, a big move towards network-based protocols.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. All right, so then we get to the production suite, which is, I think today, the most commonly used configuration, just in terms of sheer number of people. And this is running the render application on the same machine as your DAW. So rather than it being a dedicated rendering workstation, this is saying, okay, the render application runs alongside my DAW. And this is what I was just referring to, where we have this inter-application audio routing, something we call the Dolby Audio Bridge, which appears as a core audio device and allows you to get audio from your workstation into the render application. It uses an internal network link to do the metadata sending, but just allows all of this to run on a single machine. It is a Mac-only solution today, and the workstations that it can work with, again, Pro Tools Studio or Flex, Resolve, and Nuendo, and again works with the Dolby Atmos Music Panel. The challenge here with Pyramix is Pyramix runs on Windows, and therefore you do need that mastering suite solution. We've been talking to the guys at Merging a lot about what might be possible there, but today these are the DAWs that are supported with the production suite as a native integration. We'll talk a little bit later about the Music Panel, because the Music Panel does open up flexibility with other DAWs that haven't natively integrated an object panel yet. But these are the DAWs that can actually connect.
Sorry, real quick. Are you, and I'll ask just because I can, but are you planning on a PC version of the standalone? Is that something that's in the works, but because of how audio is routed, is that, or using ASIO or
yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say it's something that's in the works. It's something that we've been keeping a close eye on, and it's something that we're kind of engaging with the market to understand the challenges. And I think as we get into where things are going in terms of more native integrations, and now there really are some Windows-based solutions that don't require the render application at all, whether there will be a Windows-based version of that production suite with that into audio routing, I think is very unclear at this point.
Okay, cool, thanks.
So who is the production suite for? I mean, it's really for anyone running a DAW on a Mac that hasn't yet integrated native built-in rendering. It also has some bits of functionality that go beyond the I'm just mixing in Dolby Atmos. I want to create in Dolby Atmos, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that functionality in a few minutes. But it has some standalone functionality just as an application, even if not connected to a DAW, that can be quite helpful. Some of the limitations are, there is additional processing overhead. There is this complexity of managing two separate applications, where a setting's stored, all of those things that come along with it being two separate applications. But the good news is we've seen some pretty impressive success with this in terms of its ability to get people working that way. And then we get on to native rendering, as we refer to it. And this is really where we've been heading for a number of years, and it's taken time to get there, but we've seen some real success in the past 6 months, which is having the full Dolby Atmos workflow built entirely into a digital audio workstation. You don't need anything else. You buy a copy of the software and you're working and delivering in Dolby Atmos. And that has been kind of the dream all along, that it would be that level of integration. And as of today, we have 4 DAWs that have fully embraced this, including both speaker-based and binaural rendering. Logic Pro announced end of last year. Then Nuendo and Cubase and Resolve all announced earlier this year, and are all shipping fully natively integrated renderers, which is pretty amazing. I mean, this takes us to a whole different level of scale than any of those prior solutions. But again, the key piece here is this compatibility. You want to ensure that, yes, if I'm creating natively in Logic Pro, I want to make sure that the file I'm creating can then walk into a studio that's running the mastering suite and still work that way. And so having that ability to go between all of these different solutions is really important.
I'm a Nuendo user, and I'll say when that kicked in, that cut my production time making parts and QCing and all that in half. That was huge. I can't say how. It's going to be awesome for all the other folks using DAWs other than that when that becomes integrated.
Oh yeah, it was great being at NAMM earlier this year and having these DAWs on display, and just the people walking up and just thinking, oh, what am I going to have to do to get started? It's like, oh, I can just get Cubase Pro and I'm working. Like, that's amazing. Like, you don't have to think about it. It just works. Right. And so yeah, who's it for? It's really for anyone needing to work in Atmos in their DAW of choice that's integrated it. Now, what are some of the limitations? Well, as soon as you move out to native integrations, different manufacturers can choose to implement features in slightly different ways. You can get into, feature disparity between them. So for example, some DAWs support multiple beds. A couple of them only support one bed today with their native rendering workflow. Some don't support setting of some of the more advanced metadata settings, like our down mix and trim metadatas. Cubase Pro doesn't enable ADM import, it's only ADM export. So there are some subtle differences. That the core rendering is always there. The ability to create a file that can be shared and encoded is always there, but there are feature differences, and it makes sense because different DAWs have different user bases. They have different ways that they look at feature sets, and they need to ensure that they are implementing Atmos in a way that fits into their product, the essence of what their product is and who it's for. But that then does mean that you need to kind of understand, well, what are my workflow requirements, and will the native workflow enable what I need? And the other thing, are the
monitoring choices consistent across the platforms as well, or are there different variations in monitoring abilities as well?
There are some different variations in monitoring abilities. Like I think right now everything only goes up to 714, maybe 716. I don't quite recall, but I know that not all of the DAWs support all of the different monitoring layouts. Okay. And then the other thing is, if you're using a built-in renderer, it no longer works with the Dolby Atmos Music Panner. And this is because the built-in renderers no longer need to have that network link for metadata connections. And that was what the Music Panner was built on. So this is part of this transition that we're going through, where we were able to sort of get the ecosystem up and running through this kind of plugin, metadata link, network link to a renderer application. And now as we transition to these really streamlined, and as you say, very much faster workflows, now it's like, well, okay, these network connections aren't necessary anymore. So we're kind of working with the industry to figure out how plugins can start to fit into this workflow as well, but that's a work in progress.
Awesome.
Okay, so a couple minutes on some other tools and configuration and considerations, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So first question. So now that we've got native rendering, is that all I need? Maybe, because I couldn't possibly give a definitive answer to anything. But this is where we get into some of, I think, the nuance and understanding different people's requirements. I mentioned a couple of these things. There are a number of standalone use cases for the Dolby Atmos renderer. So one example is the personalized rendering, our PHRTF binaural solution that came out earlier this year. Today, that is only available with the renderer application. And we found that it's great having the renderer and being able to use that to develop, experiment, prototype new ideas, put new things in the market. And so when we rolled out the beta of the PHRTF solution, we were able to use the renderer as the test bed for that without needing third parties to do things to be able to get that integrated. So that's one example where we've been able to actually do something specifically for the renderer app. And then there are some QC workflows that are very useful. You can just load an ADM file into the renderer and press play and be playing it. You don't need to bring it into a timeline. You don't need to split it out to its constituent tracks and do all of the things that come along with bringing it into a DAW. You can just load it and play it. And so it's got some really great QC uses. It can load .atmos file sets as well as the ADM files. From that, you can then render out offline deliverables. So if you're needing to create a 5.1 version of something, rather than having to go back to your DAW, you can just bring it into the renderer and render out a 5.1 deliverable. It enables an export to an MP4 with an encoded bitstream inside of it, which is another very, very useful tool. And all of these things are things that we are working towards, finding ways to ensure that the DAWs where it would make sense for these things to happen are able to happen. It's just, again, going to be part of this ongoing journey. So I think there's a lot of people out there now who have maybe transitioned their primary workflow to a native integration, but still have the renderer application around for some of these standalone use cases. Whereas when it started, it was very much seen as a companion to a DAW. It sort of evolved into its own standalone product as well now. And then again, if you're using the music panner for some tempo synced object panning, that does still require working with the renderer app. So just onto a couple of other plugins that exist. I've mentioned the music panner a few times, and there's also something called the binaural settings plugin. The music panner, as I mentioned, is designed for tempo sync, position, and movement of objects. It has a step sequencer built in that you can either have pre-configured movements or specific positions that you can then track to sync to your song. And the other role it fills is enabling us to work with some DAWs that maybe don't have native object panning yet. So Ableton Live, for example, that is not a DAW that's kind of adopted an object-based panner yet, but we can instantiate the music panner inside of Ableton Live and connect to the renderer. And so within Ableton have a perfectly workable Dolby Atmos workflow. And there are other DAWs in that camp as well. This is Mac only, so similar to the production suite, it's a Mac only plugin at the moment. Then the settings plugin, as I briefly mentioned, is a plugin that enables remote configuration of some of the renderer settings, but being able to store them with your DAW session or project rather than having to always maintain it in two separate places. So being able to set the headphone metadata per object, being able to set the input configuration and descriptions is very useful, because then I can just load that with my DAW project and it will automatically configure the renderer correctly. This isn't really a creation tool, but I think it's a useful thing for people to know exists. It's something called the Dolby Atmos conversion tool. This is a free download from customer.dolby.com. And this allows for simple topping and tailing of master files. It allows for concatenation of master files, allows for adding silence. It also just allows for bringing in a file and checking the metadata and seeing how many beds, objects. Just gives you some useful information. It's just a useful little utility. And then the last thing is something that is coming soon and just wanted to sort of dangle. Any of you who came to NAMM would have seen this. Some of you may actually be beta testers. And this is a product that we've had in development for a couple of years, really designed to help and unblock some of the challenges that come around albums and album assembly and QC. So this is a tool that has been designed to work with ADM files and allows you to bring in multiple ADM files. It connects to the renderer. So this is another use case for the renderer that isn't DAW related. This is basically connecting to the renderer, and the renderer does the rendering. This is just basically playing back audio and metadata. It allows, as I say, timing, bringing in multiple tracks, referencing them to a stereo reference track, and also includes a really great EQ and limiter that's been designed specifically for Dolby Atmos to allow some limiting of these tracks, as well as gain control. This is currently in beta and will be coming to market in just a few short weeks. And I think Michael may well have something to say about this, as he's been a very active and happy tester for us. So thank you, Michael. And this is something that we've been really engaged with the community on, and it's been great getting so much feedback and so much kind of help ensuring that we're building the right thing to really make sure that we're able to unblock the right workflows. So that's been a really great process.
Well, of all of the things that have sped up my workflow and made things easier, internal rendering and this tool right here has been fantastic. And I'm honored and really happy to be a part of the development with it, because of seeing as it's been growing before it's even being released, seeing it what it was like when it was just inception into here. To tell you, being able to, I'm a big fan of albums and listening to albums all the way through, and QCing the album as an album with timing between and all of that is huge. Also, and something I'm not sure if you mentioned, but the referencing of the stereo tracks, right. Being able to toggle back and forth, that's a new addition to this latest version, but being able to bring your stereo files in and Audition, toggle back and forth and go, is my tone right? How's my volume? What's the timing? Just a whole lot of very important workflow QC aspects to where it's coming. And when this gets released, and I'm glad to hear you say it's going to be a couple of weeks, because you're going to have a whole lot of happy people when this comes out.
It's coming in hot. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. So that was it. That was what I wanted to share presentation wise. And yeah, hopefully that gave a good kind of overview of the various solutions, how they all fit together, and excited to get into any Q&A that may be coming in.
Thanks, Dave. Actually, one thing I do want to say is we're going to have you back again. So just as a reminder, so some of I'm not sure some of the questions are as they may come in, the binaural controls and the trim controls and all that. You're gonna come back for a subsequent episode to dig in a little deeper on some of the control things. So
yeah, so I gather.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so is John, actually. John, thank you for being here. And you're back for one of our next episodes. It's currently scheduled for number 6, though, to talk about educational opportunities. So thank you for being here today, but we look forward to having you back also. Christine.
Hello. Hi. That's my cue.
Yeah.
And when I say cue, so the other good thing to note, I think, is at the top of the series, and we've reminded people at the top of each of these conversations as well, that there is an original fixed series scheduled. But to your point, we are also going to elongate the series and add more follow-up sessions. So for everyone to be aware, I think we said we'd come back on the curve. We'll come back with more detail on several topics, including the evolution of these tools, and that won't be a long follow. That will be a continued extension of this series. So again, thanks for having us. We're thrilled to be here. So one of the programs that we'll be including, to your point, is a deeper dive on what is the Dolby Institute and what resources we have available, but really how is that functioning and how to engage with us and how to leverage it and what you can all do directly as well, which is incredible. With that said, we have a couple questions.
Awesome.
So John Blass asks, does the binaural settings, remember I read these verbatim, guys, so make good choices. Does the binaural settings app recognize custom groups created in the renderer? Groups still have to be created in the renderer, correct?
That is a fine question. Yes, it should. I'm trying to make sure I understand the question correctly. Groups still have to be created in the renderer, correct?
Watching the chat, John, so feel free to add more comment if you like.
Yes. So groups do have to be created in the renderer, but anything you create in the renderer should be recognized in the binaural settings plugin and allow you to use those groups.
Follow-up question, same thing with importing an ADM into the workstations that are able to import ADMs are properly entered, or there, that metadata falls along and is passed along on an export.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, good. John Merchant asks, do you have any recommendations for the best ways to route streamed tracks, e.g. Apple Music, through a studio playback system? We actually have a write-up on this. Oh, John, I'm remembering now. We owe you a write-up. Good on catching me on that. So we do have a write-up on this, and we need to do a better job of publishing it. You're welcome to answer if you want to add any commentary here, David. But
John Scanlon may also have something to say on this. I mean, I think that there are some known ways to get it done, and then there were also some changes on the Mac OS side of things recently that allow for, if you get all of the things right and have it set to a 16-channel interface and get the settings right in audio MIDI setup, you can actually now stream directly out of Mac OS into a studio configuration as well from Apple Music. That's Apple Music only, as opposed to other streaming services. But there are a number of solutions, and as Christine said, we do have a write-up that I think it'll be easier just to share that with the specific details.
Which I promised. So Romo, keep me honest. We will share that with this group, and also we'll post it on our forum and make sure that that's available.
Awesome.
Boris is asking a throwback question, we'll call it. It's, where can I find the correct way to set my speakers up in a particular room? And Boris, that is down to some of the conversation we had last session with Brian Pennington, and there's a lot of information available online as well, but also we can put you directly in touch. You can feel free to email musicstudios@dolby.com, and also see us directly if you want to get into some of the specifics. The answer is we will help you 100%. All right, reminder to post questions in the chat window. Don't be shy, we do address these. And I want to give just maybe a minute, John Scanlon, maybe you can take this. It might be a good space to actually talk through some of the resources on professional.com, as professional.dolby.com, and also some of the resources on the Dolby Institute.
Yeah, sure. And we'll be going over these in depth. So I'll give you kind of the 50,000 foot view of Dolby Institute at the moment. But with all these tools now becoming available, and with especially the launch of Apple Music last summer, it created an influx of schools that wanted to be able to teach Dolby Atmos tool sets. So we've created curriculum online for Dolby Atmos for post-production and Dolby Atmos for music. We've covered all the major DAWs that David just talked about, and all the major workflows. That curriculum is available in two ways. One, we've partnered with Avid to create a Dolby Atmos certification in their Avid Learning Partner curriculums. That's available actually now for the fall semester for instructors to start getting trained to be able to deliver this at any ALP site globally. That curriculum, as well as also not in Avid's form, but in Dolby form, in the original text graphic form, is available to any university to adopt, either in part or in whole. And right now, what I'm doing is one-to-one meetings with universities globally to look at what their studio configurations are, how we can easily upgrade them to get them into a speaker setup in their room, and then going through piece by piece as far as curriculum sets and sort of customizing this to their curriculum. As you can imagine, some schools are nonprofits, right? And they want something very easy and affordable. So getting them into Logic Pro and those workflows on binaural is a very easy way to get students interested in this. And then other schools that really want to teach Dolby Atmos workflows from headphone through speaker systems all the way through to deliverables. We're getting them used to those curriculum sets as well. Also recognizing that not all learners are the same, and especially any more people are very used to watching video content to learn. So we've created a series that's actually hosted by one of our mix engineers, Luke, who's on the Dolby team, and he goes over workflows from an artistic point of view instead of an engineering point of view. So we're trying to hit the different learners that we have available. In reference to Brian as well, Brian just completed a video with Luke on how to set up your studio, and how to calibrate your room, again, from a very high level. And the tools that Dolby offers as well, like music, the music team Christine mentioned, can help to configure and set up the studio, the Dolby Atmos room design tools, and all those different things we have available. Beyond that, we're going to start going to sites. So I'm actually booking some trips now into the fall. One of my trips will be to a school in Denmark called Sonic College, who have 5 Dolby Atmos rooms that they've just built. One of them being a dub stage, all the way down to 4 mixing rooms, down to a headphone lab, and they're having an immersive audio workshop over there as well. So we're doing a lot of in-person trainings as well.
That's terrific. A couple of notes about this. I do see some new questions in the chat, so we will come back to that in just a minute. A couple of notes on that. I think it's important to note, good reference to Luke, because he is a creative. So we do have people, I like to joke, of course, Roma's heard me say this, but everybody at Dolby either is a musician, wishes we were a musician, used to be a musician. You don't want to hear me sing, it's not a good idea. But it's incumbent in our DNA, really, again, from the founding of Dolby. And so we're deeply passionate, and Luke is a creative, is a member of Bachelors of Science, is streaming on Spotify and a number of services globally, as a producer, on a label, etc. But we work with all of you, and we've talked about that in other forums, right? But again, Michael, you're a great example. We work with all of you to take in your direct feedback, and so you're not just providing a response to what we're putting out there, you're providing the original information as well, in terms of what we develop and build, and that's from tools to even curriculum, right? And so John's working really closely and deeply with the creative and with the academy, university, whatever the mechanism is, to adjust and ensure that the information can be, let's say, natively integrated, right, in the right tone with given institution or solution. And that's what I see him doing on a pretty constant basis. So I'm excited about that. With COVID, people like Luke had to actually set up a home studio because couldn't go into an office or book a public studio. And so that's where a lot of these learnings came from. And it's just, again, one of many examples. Where do you find the videos on Luke, John Blass? Great question. They are on, I believe, John, correct me, professional.dolby.com. And are they also on the Institute link?
They're also on the dolbyinstitute.com as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to do this a little out of order. Do you happen to know if Avid is developing a native option for Atmos and Pro Tools, David?
I mean, obviously, I can't talk about other companies' roadmaps and what they are working on. What I can say is that, we have a great relationship with Avid. They've been fantastic partners. They were the first people to do anything to integrate Atmos, and from the very beginning, they've been really great partners, and we talk to them regularly. What I can say is at NAMM, they previewed some offline rendering capabilities. So if you've got an Atmos file, you can bring in an ADM, and you can now offline render to some of these channel-based deliverables that you may need, so 5.1 or stereo, which is rendering. That's doing some rendering. Now, that doesn't include kind of real-time monitoring, but is a rendering option, but just an offline rendering option for now. So they are very committed, and I think you can see just from some of their recent announcements around bringing the Atmos functionality into Pro Tools Studio. We've also done a deal with them where active Pro Tools subscribers can get the production suite for just $99, so that's $200 off. So there are a lot of ways to work with Pro Tools and Atmos, and we continue to partner with them very closely.
And they're doing the same thing, right? Taking direct feedback from the community itself.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Dave, let me ask a follow-up question, because it is in part and parcel, whatever that phrase is, to the renderer itself. Is as with Logic Pro, you're able to monitor Apple Music, the spatialization that Apple is doing. Currently, that's the only DAW that has that implemented, but because that is through the renderer, in the applications that allow internal rendering, will that be something? I don't know if you can say that would be something forthcoming. I will say that being able to monitor Innuendo, the binaural, the switch to go to binaural was, again, another huge time saver as far as QC goes. That would be another step for me. Are you looking at integration? And again, is that up to the companies that
Well, yeah, again, I mean, that's not something for Dolby to do. That's not, you know, yes, it appears as kind of part of the renderer blob within Logic Pro, but that's not part of the Dolby Atmos renderer. I think in general, though, the goal, I think, collectively is that you are able to QC once and trust how it translates. Like, I don't think we want to set out a goal where we need to have all of these different options. And so that is where the focus is right now, as opposed to trying to add that in more places or work with people. But again, that comes down to some of these other company roadmaps outside of what I think we can talk about from the Dolby side.
Okay. Yeah. I absolutely get it. And every question is, what can you do from the Dolby side? My thought process is that since it's working within your renderer, is that just Apple allowing it to move forward? You've maybe worked with other DAWs, and that's just maybe something forthcoming, or not, or totally out of scope, but just as,
well,
again, I'm looking for the time-saving elements
yeah.
for me, and this is another one along the path. That's
right.
why I asked.
Right. And, I think it's great that it's there in Logic Pro and gives that option, and people can check it there. How that functionality, which, and just to be clear, that isn't something that Dolby provided to Apple. How that sort of Apple-based functionality may or may not make it into other DAWs is kind of unclear.
Understood. I appreciate that distinction. Thank you.
So Brian Lucy asks, happily Apple is making regular updates to their headphone tech in the last few months. I concur. From the Dolby side, and is binaural development 100% done, David, or is the code still a work in progress?
It is 100%. It's perfect. What are you talking about? We are done. No, I mean, look, is anything ever done? Absolutely not. And actually, just whenever it was 3 months ago, I don't know, time doesn't exist anymore. When the latest version of the renderer 3.7.2 came out, that actually had a bunch of binaural improvements in it. The binaural renderer, the room model had some changes, especially in far mode. Like, this has been an ongoing thing. We released the personalized rendering, our PHRTF solution, earlier this year as well. That brought along with it a number of changes to take advantage of that. So this is very much still in progress. Now, what I will say is the thing that we don't want to do is make sort of big, changes that then mean that previously made content wouldn't sound right. Like, we need to ensure that there's this evolution and familiarity, but we are very actively continuing to evolve, adapt, get feedback, iterate. I think again, I can't quite remember when, at some point a version came out last year where we got a good amount of feedback from some classical and jazz engineers around some kind of higher end distortion, which we put some focus into to resolve that. So we have been very actively monitoring, listening, and iterating and continuing to improve, and we very much intend to do more of that going forward.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I can say this piece is, we're constantly at work because we do listen to you and the feedback you provide. Hopefully you've all been seeing that. So you can imagine that we're at work on things now, and then you can imagine that you can continue to influence us on further progress. And so, yes, the answer is yes.
And I think just on the headphone thing in particular, as you say, Apple have been making regular updates, and that's great. And we are talking with them, and there's a lot of work around, again, back to this, how do we ensure that as an industry, as a community, we are able to trust and believe in that headphone experience across many different endpoints. And I think that is both us working with you as a creative community, it's working across manufacturers. It's really getting to that point where we can have that trust and that experience that we can all get behind. So that continues to be a big focus. Now, are we going to see some like new release where suddenly it's completely different? No, probably not, but it's going to be constantly evolving.
Yep.
I think there's some. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Sorry, just to add, also that it's across the entire ecosystem. Right. We want to ensure that it's all product partners, right? All playback opportunities, right? All services, all devices. So just to really underline and highlight that it really needs to be that, you're creating, you're mixing, you're producing for your music, right? and trusting in our commitment to creative intent, and then holding us accountable as you do, which is terrific, and the services and the device partners to deliver that, right, that intent across the entire ecosystem. But that you're not mixing ever for one device or one service, one partner, but that you're trusting in the lifespan of your music. That's really what we want to see. I'm sorry, Michael.
Oh, no, totally great. I was just going to I guess, reiterate that I think that it's important that people know that, as we understand the brain and perception and codecs and all of that, is that it will probably always be evolving, and knowing that one particular listening experience is not necessarily the defining experience, and listening into, speaker system or listening in different ways to know how things are going to translate, but that the binaural or the 2-channel playback, however it's spatialized in headphones, is going to be something that is going to be constantly looked at. We're always, as I just say, as society and scientists and curiosity people understanding how the brain works and how we understand perception, this will go on and go on and on. It will be an evolving process. So, please use multiple versions to listen to understand how they translate.
Terrific. So for personalized binaural rendering, is there a version of personalized HRTF capture that you have found yields better results?
I think you mean of the app itself, because we've released a few beta updates. No, in general, the app itself hasn't changed that much in terms of yielding better results. The thing that we've been very focused on is trying to ensure that, regardless of lighting or movement or whatever it is, if it passes and if we deliver an HRTF, that we have a very high confidence level in that HRTF that was generated. And you may, if you've used the app, you may have found that, like, sometimes it will fail because it says there's low lighting. Different phones, like we recently released the Android side, and there's a lot more variability in cameras on Android devices, and so some have different sensitivities to lighting, and so that can lead to them failing. But if it passes, we want to have a very high confidence in the configuration that was generated. So no. That's another area where we continue to evolve and iterate. We have uncovered a few, I would call them fairly minor bugs on the back end as we've gone through the beta process that have yielded some adjustments to the back end processing. But we recently did a survey of beta users, and some of you may have responded, and it was actually really positive. I need to make sure I get the number right. 89% of the respondents, and it was actually a pretty decent number of respondents, said it improves their experience and they intend to carry on using their personalized configuration going forward. They would always plan to use their personalized. So that's been a really positive measurement in terms of the quality. There's always more to do, like everything, as I say, but I wouldn't say that there's a particular version that yields the best results.
I will tell you that David's heard me tell this story. I won't tell it the way I have internally, of course, but for me, it makes a pretty phenomenal difference. And I think particularly in the world these days, when we're all living on these webinars, we forget. I can see that I have a very different head and face from David, for an example. So my experience with binaural has always been a bit challenging, and for me, it made it just an absolute phenomenal difference, just from a listening perspective, which was moving, to say the least. So I encourage you all, if you haven't had a moment, to take a moment with it. I'm just going to do another call out for questions in the Q&A. We very much appreciate everything that you've contributed so far, and give Michael a moment if there are any particular questions that you want to ask as well of David or John.
Interesting. Just a side comment back to the personalization and the listening too, and back to how people. I mean, you guys have a team of scientists working 24 hours a day around the world on, looking at all these aspects of perception and hearing, and I applaud that, because that's That's how we can get past from the creative to the listener, being able to listen to the music and experience the art form without here's the nuts and bolts behind it. It's not, watching a movie and going, that's green screen, because I saw this in a thing. You're just listening to it, or watching a movie, seeing a story. You're just listening to an album and you're hearing the artist's intent of taking you on some sort of emotional journey.
Enhancing the science of sight and sound is,
exactly.
It's a corporate cheesy phrase, but it's true. And to your point, that is the driving thing, and getting it to the point where it's natural, lifelike, and emotional, and it enables amazing artists to deliver something that evokes this kind of reaction is such an incredible thing, and it can seem like, as I say, a cheesy corporate phrase, but it is actually quite a driving force that we believe in.
There are, either very tangible to that. I hold listening sessions, bring people over, play DJ, talk about it, keep engineers involved. And, every time something comes on, whether we get to headphones or whether it's on the speaker system, there is a body behavior when it's right.
Yeah.
And when somebody is passing that, they sit and they just listen, and all of a sudden the shoulders drop, and then it becomes transparent.
It's really true. My team has the pleasure of living that nature of experiences. And people sometimes ask me, well, how do I know if it's Atmos? And I say, did you feel it? If you felt it, that was Atmos. It is a funny thing that David was alluding to, but we actually live our conference calls internally, our strategy calls are around creating emotive experiences, right? I mean, that is literally, there's an emotional response on these calls. So they're quite passionate, you might imagine. But it's when you see their knee tap, right? Or beat and their toe tap. It's when you see them close their eyes. It's when you see them bob their head and you're like, got him. Right? Yeah. And that's what it should be. You should feel it, right? And it should be a visceral experience.
And I've totally noticed that the HRTFs allow people to have that more in headphones than they did before. And that's like 100%. Trying to get back to that point.
That's because the physics of that is challenging, right? I mean, you are taking, this global environment and trying to compress it into a couple of cans or buds. And that, that is a pretty big difference physically.
Well, and just to be clear on the whole personalized HRTF thing, I mean, I think for everyone, it makes an improvement. For some people, and there is a meaningful percentage of people for whom it takes it from being an uncomfortable to full-on unpleasant experience. And it actually resolves that. So there's a certain amount of sort of equality that goes into the PHRTF conversation as well, beyond it just being about improving the timbral quality of your mix. It's actually about making the binaural experience more accessible to more people in the world.
Yeah.
Well, that's what makes it so, I imagine for you guys so challenging, is that for every 1,000 people listening, there are 1,000 different brains processing in different ways and trying to understand. Like we have and I think he's on here, our good friend Buddy Judge. I think he was going to join us today. And, I know Buddy, we've had many conversations, and Buddy says he doesn't localize without turning the head tracking on for a moment. Takes him a second. Everybody behaves differently how they're hearing these things. So creating that experience, that's why the constant evolution, as I say, is like you're always going to be learning things to make it better.
But binaural is fascinating in that respect. And to your point, everyone experiences it differently, and it is a fundamentally personal experience. You can't have a shared headphone experience, or it's very hard, especially when you're thinking about like externalization and things like that.
Right.
And I'm not one of the amazingly talented scientists at Dolby who understands the kind of neuroscience of all of this, but I have just from talking to people, I have this theory that there is a certain amount of psychological, when you put on a pair of headphones and you have these two things strapped to your ears, it's very hard for you to let your brain believe that sounds are coming from elsewhere. And I think that there's a psychological piece that comes into it about being able to actually acknowledge that, oh no, that thing is localized from coming over there, even though I know I'm wearing these headphones. So there's even that element to it as well, which goes beyond even the shape of the ear and everything else. It's a really interesting set of problems. I often make the analogy to the good old magic eye pictures, where you've got to kind of trick your brain to see the horse jumping out at you. And once you can do it, it's like, oh, that's how I do it. But it can be hard to get your brain into the right mode. And so the more that we can do to help with that, and there are all of these different pieces that go into really trying to make that a much more I don't know, easy, streamlined, and believable experience.
I was going to go, wait, that was a horse? I didn't know.
So I think this might be a good moment to just, again, thank you all very much for today. And again, thank the P&E Wing and the Recording Academy for having us. We look very forward to continuing this series. There are a couple of questions that we did not get to today because they are best conducted offline. We see those. We thank you. We're going to come back to you, Brian, Lucy. So do not feel unheard, and ask Maureen to rejoin us. Thank you.
There she is.
Just thanks, everybody. Good conversation. And thanks, everybody who tuned in. Our next episode will be the 4th in this series and is planning to be focused on formats for Dolby listening, lossy versus lossless, sample rates, etc. So we'll hope to see you there.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Phil.